The Vancouver Canucks have bought out Oliver Ekman-Larsson, but now what do they do with that money? And what's the offseason strategy? We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And we're now also available on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. It is great to bring back to the show the host of Locked On Canucks, Trevor Beggs. And Trevor, we're early in the offseason still, and it's already been eventful in Vancouver. Let's start with the big buyout of about a week ago, Oliver Ekman-Larsson. That's a lot of years to buy out. Were you surprised by this move?
You know what, Gil? I don't want to toot my own horn or anything, but I think I might have been one of the only Canucks reporters here who was not surprised by the buyout. I didn't really see much of another avenue for the Canucks. You know, I've kind of detested the idea of trading, you know, a Besser, Garland, a Beauvillier for pennies on the dollar just because you need to get rid of cap space. You know, it's like that idea of trading Besser in the 11th for a late first, like what had been floated around. I think for Ekman-Larsson, he just wasn't providing any value to this team anymore. You know, quick shout out to the Athletic and Dom Lucijan's player model. Oliver Ekman-Larsson's value last season was negative $500,000. That's pretty hard to do. He was one of the worst defensemen in hockey. Every time I was covering a game live, you know, he was so slow. He was getting beat to pucks, and it's a sad situation. His body's let him down, but I think this is the only road the Canucks could go down. I mean, it's a surprise in the sense that it is the most expensive ordinary buyout in NHL history. So, you know, it took some brass cojones to pull this one off, but at the end of the day, I think it needed to be done.
And first of all, what went wrong? I mean, you say his body sort of let him down, but was he never a good fit in the Canucks system? What happened?
I mean, I don't know if anyone was a good fit in the Canucks system. You know, for listeners who don't know, at the end of the season, Ethan Bear had a really, really telling interview, and he talked about coming over from Carolina to Vancouver and basically saying that no one knows what they're doing in Vancouver. Like, he said he was shocked about how structured it was in Carolina versus how much of it was just kind of every man for himself in Vancouver. So I think a lot of players are put in a bad spot. For Ekman-Larsson in particular, I mean, he showed some defensive chops in year one in Vancouver, and then, you know, he had that foot injury at the World Championships, and I'm not sure if it was an excuse or if it was just another year of him being older and slower. But yeah, I think he was, you know, on that downward trajectory for a long time in Arizona. I don't think it was necessarily coming to Vancouver and being in a bad system. I think, you know, you look at the underlying numbers, he's been a pretty below average defender for 4 of the past 5 seasons now. So it's a long track record of him not being very good. So, I mean, I hope he gets a fresh start, maybe in like a sheltered bottom pairing role, but this guy was playing like a top matchup role, and he's just not that player, and he never has been.
So the buyout frees up some cap space. You talked about the need for that. What do you think the Canucks do with that cap space, and what is sort of the plan for the offseason?
Well, that's the golden question, isn't it, Gil? I think, you know, the Canucks right now have a shade under $7 million in cap space. I mean, they were over the cap, and then the Ekman-Larsson buyout freed up $7.1 million next season. I think they got to spend most of that money on the defense. And in particular, you know, I think you need to spend that money or probably find it in the trade market. But a second pairing left shot defender to go alongside Filip Hronek. I think we've seen it from Hronek's past. He's played his best hockey with a defensively responsible left shot defenseman. Olli Maatta last season was the perfect partner for him. You started to see Hronek, his effectiveness dwindle with Ben Sherratt when he was still in Detroit. So, I mean, a player like Ryan Graves, to me, he's going to be expensive for sure. Everyone is in free agency, but a player like Ryan Graves, to me, I think would be a perfect fit for the Canucks as a left shot defenseman. And in terms of the other gaps, I mean, third line center is a gaping hole in this team. You know, with Bear on the shelf, they need another right shot defenseman. But I think the Canucks are probably better off taking some flyers on guys in those roles. Because again, even though they bought Ekman-Larsson, they're still up against the cap. They still have, I think they're a top 10 team in terms of cap dollars committed and going into next season. So there's not a ton of wiggle room here. So those are kind of the three needs for this team. 2 top 4 defensemen and a third line center. Not easy to fill when you got less than $7 million to do so.
No. So is there a possibility that someone is still traded away to free up a little more cap space to address some of those needs?
I think so. I think it makes a ton of sense. And, we talked about it. Shout out to the everydayers on Locked On Canucks. We've talked about it quite a few times, but we did an episode about a month and a half ago talking about trading Brock Besser for 7 pricey centers. And really the idea of that episode was, wingers, their value's depressed, but can you trade a top 6 winger for an expensive third line center? And we tossed around names like Andrew Kopp, Jean-Gabriel Pageau, guys in that mold who are a bit overpaid and underperformed a bit last season. I think that makes the most sense for this team because, guys like Kopp and Pageau, again, overpaid, but I think they'd slot in really well to the Canucks third line center role. They both got penalty killing experience. And at the end of the day, the Canucks just have too much cap committed on the wings. So another reason why this buyout made sense, the OEL buyout, is because, everyone knew the Canucks were in a pickle before. It's hard to make a deal when you have, negative cap space, right? So now that they got some wiggle room, like maybe they can find some values for guys like Besser, Garland, and Beauvillier. Personally, I still think trading Beauvillier makes the most sense just because everyone is so cap sensitive right now. He's got the lowest cap of the 3, only 1 year left on his deal, and he looked really good after coming to Vancouver. But we'll see. I could see it. That could make a ton of sense, trading a top 6 winger for a third line center.
Is there a plan to implement more of a strategy this year? You talked about the team lacking a system. Is there a plan to sort of change that?
Yeah, and I mean, it did start to change under Tocchet. I don't want to read too much into it. 34 games of garbage time. They had the 3rd softest schedule in the league over that stretch, but there were some signs of it moving in the right direction. And Ethan Bear kind of said the same in that telling interview at the end of the season. How he thinks the team there. He said in his words the team's not there yet, but they're getting in the right direction. And he kind of said it's been a lot better since Boudreau. You can see it. I think. There's more of a commitment to playing defensively. The Canucks don't look as loose out there. I think they are supporting each other on the boards, both in the offensive and defensive zone a bit more. That being said, I think the personnel is still lacking on this team. Going into next season, this team really has 3 defenders. They have Hughes, Hronek, and Tyler Myers. And I think this team would trade Tyler Myers if there was a market for him. So this defense still needs to be completely redone. So structure is one thing, but you still got to have the guys to play the game.
Talking about guys to play the game, the draft is coming up this week. What do you expect the Canucks to do, especially in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to think of them drafting for positional need. Alvin can say best player available until he's blue in the face, but it's going to be really hard to pass up a center or a defenseman at that 11th slot. But I'm not sure what to expect, Gil. I mean, Alvin kind of threw a curveball this week when he was talking in the media. When asked about the 11th overall pick and moving the pick, he didn't talk about moving the pick down in the draft. He talked about moving up the draft. And specifically, he said something along the lines of, Brian Burke once told me you can always move up in the draft. So, he was really teasing the market with that one. So I'm not quite sure what to expect. I mean, there could be some blockbuster in the works. Maybe that Columbus pick at 3, maybe the Washington pick at 8. But if they do pick at 11, I mean, I trust some of the insiders I talk to in this city. They really like Tom Willander. They really like Nate Danielson. My personal preference, I'd love to see them take a swing and draft Simashev. I'm going to be honest with the people here on Locked On NHL. I drafted David Reinbacher when he fell to the Canucks at number 11 when we did our mock draft. I had a bit of buyer's regret, though. I was surprised to see Reinbacher there, but I do like Simashev better as a prospect. So we'll see what happens. I do like Simashev, Reinbacher, Willander a lot. But there's a lot of, really good talent in terms of forwards too, like Zach Benson, Gabe Perreault. So it's going to be a really interesting couple of days here. It's a great time of year, Gil. It's a great time of year.
Yeah, never a dull moment at the end of June, beginning of July in the NHL. Trevor, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Of course. You can find us wherever you stream podcasts, Locked On Canucks, myself and Kyle Bowen. He's the real mastermind behind the operation. The show doesn't happen without him. Basically because I got 2 young kids and I got no time to produce the show. So big shout out to him. And of course, you can find us on YouTube. We've had some momentum in the last month, so go check out the channel. Some great thumbnails, lots more comments and subscribers. So it's been a fun ride here. And then for myself, you can find me on social media at Trev Beggs, Beggs, the last name.
All right, Trevor, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Yeah, talk to you again, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. Well, it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.